All right. Hello, everybody. Terbuthi, Tony Zerbin, both psychologists at Sojourn Psychology, and we want to talk about trauma. So, what do you think, Tony? What are you were saying some pretty cool things to me the other day about trauma and some of the body dynamics, the somatic view of trauma.
Absolutely. So there's two different ways that we can talk about trauma right now, and I think a lot of people that we're seeing are dealing with both. One's easier to pin down because it's a bit more glamorous. It's what you see in movies, is what we talk about as shock trauma. And shock trauma loosely can be defined as the short-term, over a couple of minutes, couple of days events that overwhelm us to the point where something of our core identity is shaken or is fragmented even a little bit. And that's things like car accidents, natural disasters, witnessing somebody that you love and care about a lot get injured to the point of death or close to, things like that. Then there's another type of trauma, which is slower. It's not this large, impactful event that happens, but it's a heightened level of alertness and stress that can drag out for a long time. And this is the kind of stuff that you look at and say, hey, this is where our resources are being stretched thin in like a pandemic. And the pandemic's a really good example and relevant for us of this long-term, slow drip, drip, drip trauma that we're okay at the beginning, and then it just weighs on us and drags on and drags on and drags on. And we never really get a space to land that feels fully safe, where we can recharge and rest. So
That's
these
awesome.
are two different ways of talking about it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it's a kind of a different lens. Like when we talk about trauma, we'll talk about little T, big T trauma, but the length, the how the trauma is exposed to us, how it registers, and it's so relevant to consider the slow exposure, that consistent exposure, and that's so relevant for us right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, if you want a picture for it, you can kind of think about the large rock. And this is what we build our identity on, is this large rock. And we can have things happen to those large rocks. We can have somebody come along and crack that rock in half. That's shock trauma. Or you can have a lot of wind and sand and water beat against this rock and slowly wear it down. And that's this other drip, drip, drip trauma.
Yeah, and that's the more actually then when you put it that way, that's this more realistic trauma and the difficulty, and I've been thinking about this as well. So it's really cool to hear that such a somatic lens about trauma is it would be much more frequent or normal for a rock to be eroded by that drip, drip, drip.
Mm-hmm.
And yet culturally, we're having such a hard time having language around this trauma experience that we're having just right now.
Yeah, it's easier to look at things like a car accident and say, oh yeah, that was a clear trauma. That was something that was really brutal. Like that's awful. Nobody likes that. It's a lot harder to put your thumb on the fact that I haven't been able to really settle for 2 years. And it's been something that's been invisible. And I don't know where it's coming from. So my nervous system is just wound up higher than it otherwise would be.
Yeah, nobody's doing well. And I like that too. We have all these different images. My nervous system is rounded up higher. It's winded up.
Yep.
And it is. We don't get to dip down to our baseline. So there is, when we're talking about that drip, drip, drip trauma experience and the erosion. So there's this experience. Again, there's that great New York Times article about languishing. That the emotional experience, the psychological experience of languishing is a byproduct of this drip, drip, drip.
Yeah.
Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's in times like this when we're dealing with these really protracted periods of heightened stress that we run into two particular issues. One is it's hard to put your thumb on. So we tell ourselves, I should be fine. And I should have the energy to do this task. I did 2 years ago. Why don't I right now? What's wrong with me? I don't get it. And it's a fog. It's this just wearying fog that comes along. And
Yeah.
that's more the negative assessment of it. A positive assessment, as in bringing, that's what it takes away. The positive in something that we can bring in, but we don't always know how, is what do we do to build up and refresh our resources to just to bear this, because it's not forever. The trauma sets in is when we start saying, oh, this feels like forever.
Yeah.
And this is my new way of seeing the world, and it's going to always be like this, and it's just never going to be better.
Yeah, there's no light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what can we do about that?
Yeah, and it's true, and it's honoring both that, like, yeah, of course I feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but then here I am. And
Mhm.
and I will say, and especially during COVID, it's like we need to be alive in the life that we're living. Like, what does that mean? I love how you said too, like finding the resources. What are my resources here?
Yeah, yeah. So we have that honest assessment saying this heightened level of alertness and stress that we're under, this invisible threat that we're around, it takes energy from us. And it might only be 10% of our energy, but you stretch that out across 2 years. That takes energy. It takes resources, and we have to be able to recalibrate and reorient to saying, hey, I've got less to work with now. But then the other thing is saying, what can I do in my life that gives me a little bit more capacity? Maybe I drop a responsibility, but what do I do that enriches my life here and now? Is it a little routine I start in the evening where I just turn the lights down a little bit lower, put on some nice music? And can I afford to do that? And when we're dealing with these long-term protracted stresses, can we afford not to take care of ourselves in these little ways daily, little rituals throughout the day?
Yeah, and I think it's profound that you use this language of an invisible threat, because so often in parenting we use that to describe this, like the relationship that even when we're not with our child's not with us, we can assure them there's this invisible threat. However, it's just like the other side. You know, we have this invisible threat of the trauma that we're enduring during this pandemic global crisis. And just as our relationship and invisible threads are there, this trauma invisible thread, the drip, drip, drip.
Mm-hmm.
The drip, drip, drip is always there. I can't hear it. I'm not always thinking about it, but it's always dripping.
Yeah.
That's powerful, Tony. So any sort of closing remarks about this like erosion experience? I love what you're speaking about, resources.
I think honestly the biggest thing that I can encourage people, and I don't know how to not make it sound trite because of the language we have in our culture, but is to look for things that bring more beauty into your life. Those little moments where you have something to pause and say, wow, is this a memory that we pick up? Pictures from past trips that were great? Is it paintings that we have in our lives? Is it music we listen to? Is it nourishing ourselves with one of our favorite meals? They're little things, but the drip, drip, drip is a little thing too. And as much as it erodes from us, we have the opportunity to build ourselves up in little ways as well. And that goes for the long term.
Yeah, that's lovely. So let's take care of our little rocks. So those beautiful, be here now, simple, simple, celebratory, moments. Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, thank you, Tony. Actually, I love the way you spoke about this. That was beautiful for me to hear, and felt good to just hear a different language about this erosion drip, drip, drip experience.
Yeah. It's good talking with you, Tara.
You too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.